Our Free and Equal segment tonight, the Supreme Court won't review a decision that says a North Carolina voting law discriminates against African Americans. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit claimed that North Carolina legislators purposely reduced the influence of African American voters. So is this a setback for supporters of voter ID or just the result of a poorly written law? With me now, manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation's Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Hans, talk to me about this. I guess it was the Supreme Court declined to hear this case. What does this mean?
Well, the lower court decision was clearly a political decision. It really had nothing to do with the facts and the law because, in fact, the North Carolina law was almost identical to a South Carolina voter ID law that was upheld by a different court of appeals back in 2013, and it's been in place ever since. And people shouldn't read too much into what the Supreme Court did today. They did not rule on the merits of the case. They refused to take it because of procedural chaos going on in the state. The legislature asked for an appeal. The new Democratic Attorney General came in and tried to withdraw the appeal, and they're in a fight over whether he's got the power to do that or not.
Right. So that's essentially why, that's essentially why they declined to hear this particular case. Do you expect voter ID, a case of this nature, I guess, to reach the Supreme Court shortly?
I think other state cases may get there, although I got to tell you, I don't think the challengers to voter ID laws really want to get to this U.S. Supreme Court when they lose cases. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Last year, just before the November election, Virginia's voter ID law was upheld by a different panel of judges from the Fourth Circuit. That was not appealed, because I don't think they thought that the current makeup of the Supreme Court, I don't think they believe that voter ID is going to get thrown out.
No, I don't think so. If you look at the facts, it doesn't even make sense to insinuate or claim that minorities in America have a harder time of getting a government ID, because I think if you look at the percentage, it's something like 3% of African Americans don't have a government-issued ID and only 2% of white Americans. So the numbers don't add up there. It's an emotional argument, in my opinion. But Hans, let me ask you about this. That's voter ID. I want to pivot to voter fraud for a second. President Trump issued an executive order, commission he called it, to examine how relevant or how prevalent voter fraud is in our nation. Liberals have gone wild about this. Why are they opposed to this?
Well, because look, for the last decade at least, they've been pushing this false narrative that there's no voter fraud in the U.S., we don't need to worry about it, and we shouldn't do anything to change the honor system we have and actually do things like require photo ID or actually provide, require proof of citizenship when you register to vote, because they really don't want that kind of data found.
They don't want that kind of accountability. I guess my question is, and maybe this is coming from a cynical standpoint, not trusting people to use the honor system honorably, but how do Democrats actually know that people if people are who they say they are, if there's no way to prove that? It seems like there would be the rampant opportunity or vulnerability for abuse.
Well, there is, but don't forget, remember last year, Project Veritas released undercover video of two Democratic consultants who talked about the fact that they intended busing people from polling place to vote, particularly in places with no ID, and that they'd been doing it for years. And a voter ID law is going to stop that kind of thing from happening.
Right, and I guess it gets down to the crux of the matter here, and that is there enough evidence? Do we have enough evidence as the American people who study this specifically, or our government officials, to warrant a special commission on this? Do we have enough evidence that voter fraud might actually tip the scales in an election?
Yes, we do. We started a database at the Heritage Foundation about a year and a half ago. This is only voter fraud convictions in a court of law. Without even doing much research, we're up to almost 500 cases of convictions around the country.
Yeah, and it's absolutely incredible. And you also mentioned James O'Keefe. He's done multiple videos in New Hampshire and then again with during the Hillary Clinton campaign about busing people in. One more thing about voter fraud and voter ID before we go, Hans, and that is I want to show a short video of this is Secretary of State from Kansas, Chris Kobach. He'll be in charge of the commission. This is what he said about it this weekend.
The commission is not set up to disprove or to prove President Trump's claim, nor is it just looking at the 2016 election. We're looking at all forms of election irregularities, voter fraud, registration fraud, voter intimidation, suppression, and looking at the vulnerabilities of the various 50 election systems we have in each of the states. And another point I'd make, Chris, is it's a bipartisan commission. The first half of the membership has been announced with the formation announcement last week, but there'll be more members announced. So it's a bipartisan group of people, all experts in their field, and we'll look at the facts and go where the facts lead us.
Hans, I found that very interesting. First of all, Democrats are saying, oh, he's a white nationalist. He can't be in charge of anything because he's racist. But when he listed what this commission is actually going to study, he said actual votes, voter registration, and voter intimidation and voter suppression. Those are two things that the Democrats claim as their own, their pet topics, yet they're opposing this because who is in charge of it?
Yeah, but look, those kind of claims against Chris Kobach are simply untrue. Let me tell you why they don't like Chris Kobach. Because he managed to convince the Kansas legislature to pass one of the most effective model laws in the country. They now require photo ID to vote in person and absentee. And you know, absentee balloting, that's a big tool of vote thieves. And they require proof of citizenship when you register to vote. That's why they just can't forgive him, because he's been very effective in what he's done.
Right, that's why they pivot immediately to their go-to insult against any Republican that they don't like. He must be racist.